What do we know? Not very much. The ANC says it thinks the way forward for South Africa is a government of national unity involving as many parties that have achieved representation in Parliament as possible. Under what circumstances? Well, there are a couple of motherhood and apple pie principles which would seem to disqualify some of the parties, but the ANC is not disqualifying some of the parties after apparently trying to get hold of Mkhonto weSizwe party for days and days and days. They eventually got a call back late yesterday. What in the MK intentions are, we do not know. The EFF has said no to any kind of arrangement with the Freedom Front Plus and the DA. The DA hasn't named MKP and EFF as parties with which they will not do governmental business, but their description of the kinds of parties they are prepared to work with pretty much exclude MKP and EFF. So where does that leave us? Up S Creek with a paddle, maybe. Ebrahim Fakier, political analyst, joins us now. Ebrahim, shake that crystal ball of yours and tell me what it reveals.
You mean the non-existent one?
That's the one, yeah.
John, I don't know. This is not a crystal ball question. This is a kind of options question.
Yeah.
No. Yeah. So, look, this is the ANC intimating what it would prefer. And, of course, its preference is not born of fundamental maturity and forward-looking progress. This is a matter of contingency. They literally cannot govern. So it's not just magnanimity, this is practicality. Now, be that as it may, that doesn't mean that they weren't immature in this. They could have been way less mature. And so I think the approach is the correct one, especially if they want to build some stature and say that we are reaching out to almost as many as we can, and we'll try and incorporate and include as many as we can. That doesn't mean that it is fundamentally feasible. There are going to have to be some principles beyond fidelity to the Constitution, the idea of maintaining the independence of the Reserve Bank being one. Other than fidelity to the Constitution, also the fact that they would want to promote social cohesion, non-racialism, non-sexism, democracy, the kind of classic sort of ANC triumvirate of values. But beyond that, you'll need something quite substantial to determine who should be in and who should be out. Fidelity to the Constitution, I think, does sort of put two of the parties on the back burner, but they're still talking to both of those parties. So it's an act of magnanimity born out of practicality and necessity. That's what it is.
And it's also complicated by the fact that the ANC is far from being one voice on this. I don't claim to know the inner thoughts of many of the members of the ANC's National Executive Committee, the provincial executive committees, the alliance partners, but it does seem clear that there are many people within the ANC who simply don't want any kind of arrangement with the DA and are quite happy to have one with the EFF, even though the EFF is one of those parties whose fidelity to the Constitution is questionable.
That's true, and one is not quite sure whether those same ANC members themselves know what is at the back of their minds. I think often it's guided by what's in their immediate interests rather than what's in their ideology, because their ideology appears to be completely susceptible to the interests. But be that as it may, I think that's a point aside. The questions they've got to answer, if they really want this formation with the EFF, firstly, is that they simply together do not have the numbers. So they're still faced with the conundrum of having to breach the 50% plus one. Now, if that's simply a practical mathematical question, there are deeper political questions to answer. The first of those is, if you really have such an affinity with the EFF, what was the tension about over the last little while that you've had with them? Secondly, why did they have to be expelled from the ANC? Because they wouldn't have been a formation of their own if they weren't expelled. Question number 3 is, while you were together and while you had the opportunity to work together since the formation of the EFF, you didn't. And even before they were expelled, quite what did you achieve when you had this, in inverted commas, Black Pact. So the Black Pact hasn't really brought about any fundamental change. The fourth question that they have to answer is, even if you want to breach the mathematical question of 50% plus one, and you bring in the MK party, notwithstanding its sort of antipathy to the Constitution, the person was the leader, not just of the ANC, but of the Republic, had every organ of the party behind them, the institutions of state at their disposal, instruments of policy at their feet for 10 years, and yet what social transformation happened? Unemployment increased, poverty increased, inequality increased, state institutions were hollowed out, and a few beneficiaries did very well. Contradictorily, we know that life expectancy went up under that leader, but that was purely because there was a reversal of HIV policy. So the ANC members also themselves have a very large number of questions to answer, even if they don't want any working relationship with the DA. The question for them practically is, first, breach the numbers. Once you can breach the numbers, can you answer some of those ideological questions? And I'm not sure that there's any satisfactory answer to that.
It's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be quick, Ebrahim. It's a fairly sort of cliched and trite thing to say, but we've got to accept that. We mustn't expect announcements over the weekend that are going to show us a path to nirvana.
No, we're certainly not. And I think even if we do, even if there's a sudden sort of, Harry Potter arrives with his magic wand, and we wave away some of the problems, the reality is that you face a local government election in about 2 years, and the fractures will then start beginning to emerge, even if you have some, in Afrikaans, as they call it, a toenadering between the parties now. So there's still fragmentation and proliferation of parties that might be on the horizon, given that the local government elections come. There may be tensions among those who enter into the government of national unity, but I think they all the parties, bar none, have to answer these two questions. The first is, you may exist as a party and you may have to make calculations about what's in your interest as a party. But for once, even if it's in the short term, can you think about what the interests of the society are going to be as a whole? Because you may find that your party might exist and the society doesn't, number one. Number two, is there anything that you can surmount in your own narrow interests, in which in other interests, that of the public, can predominate over what your current short-term ones are? And so those are the two primary questions I think they need to be focusing on, rather than the kind of perennial and perpetual questions of internal parochial concerns that has animated the parties thus far. So it is not going to be easy. There aren't any easy answers. Many are gazing inwardly, but that's the wrong place to look. You have to start looking outward. And I think President Ramaphosa, though contingent, has set the tone for trying to look out. Now, I mean, I'm not saying that, he's the great messiah, but at least he's setting out the posture of saying, let's look outward rather than looking inward. And he's having, one feels for him, because he's having to feel all of the problems of those people that you pointed out so accurately, those who are saying we don't want to do this, we don't want to do that. And I think the thing they don't get is they don't have many options.
Ebrahim Fakier, thank you very, very much indeed for that explanation, a political analyst and a man who thinks deeply and wisely about these matters.